There we have Colombia, Venezuela, Honduras, Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Cuba. Colombia, I said, yes. Nicaragua. United States, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Puerto Rico, Costa Rica, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, I already said it, Venezuela, come on, don't stop. The Republic of Argentina, this applause is to receive the rest of the world, Asia, Africa, Australia, Europe. They connect now, how are you? May God bless you, may He keep you. Thank you for those marvelous flags from our countries that we're so proud of. May God bless you. May He keep you. Good morning, good afternoon, good night. Now I greet all the people that are on the other side, watching from a device, watching this service. We are live on such special days here in the United States, like around the world. Before I go deep into what I'd like to transmit and say to you, I'd just like to say that in 2 weeks, 2 weeks from now on a Wednesday, I think it's June 25th, we're going to have a DNA meeting, but it's not going to be here at River. It's going to be on live stream so that everyone, it's the first DNA that we live stream. DNA is a leadership meeting. They've always been internal for those that serve, for our volunteers, for our leaders, and for the employees and staff. But we strongly felt, from behalf of the Lord, that there are many congregations, many churches, many friends, pastors, leaders that need to know in one way or another the secrets, not so secrets, from River, how we work, what our totems are, what our axioms are, what our proverbs are, the foundations, institutional foundations that have brought us this far. So we're going to be sharing that. I'm going to give you the time. I think it'll be Pacific time, 4 p.m. Either way, it's recorded, so whoever's studying or working, you can watch it after, because we'll post it online as it happens with our messages. But it'll be 2 or 3 p.m. This is due to the time difference, so it's not too late in Latin America and Europe and Asia. It's going to be a day of DNA, an hour and a half, 2 hours, so that you can watch from your homes. I think more than ever, it'll be explicit leadership of things that cannot be said on a Sunday. I say they cannot be said not because they're prohibited, but because there are people that are not too interested in the internal functioning of the church, how we value character, what criteria we have for those that work with us, what makes somebody a volunteer and what doesn't, what classifies us, what has brought us this far. These are marvelous axioms. Some are as old as ever. Others are new that we learned on this course, and I think it'd be great to leave them in a time capsule, to leave it there recorded so that the rest of the world can always go to this and feed themselves off of this. It'll be a classic class of leadership, open to all. It's not that we're going to teach the world how to lead. No, we're going to share how we lead, what has worked for us, why we minimized the congregation after the pandemic, why there isn't other activity during the week because there's a reason, why we don't have a youth group, a children's ministry, explaining all the whys. I'm not saying that it's the perfect model for a church to be followed. No, it's a model. The same way there are other congregations with other models that are based more on worship, others are based more on teaching, others on the education of children. We have one clear objective that we're going to share during this DNA within 2 weeks. I know it's well, we've got a ways to go, but I wanted to share it with you so that way on that day you know that instead of turning on Netflix or Prime or Disney or Judge Judy, I hope that you tune in to that DNA night, and after, we can entertain ourselves for a bit. With that being said, I'd also like to give thanks to all those that are here today, to those that are faithful. We're living through difficult times. I'll speak about this in a few moments because some were telling me, Dante, you're not pronouncing yourself with what's happening here in the country that you're residing in, the United States. And yes, we're going to pronounce our position because obviously the church always has a posture in respects to it. Posture, we're not necessarily antagonistic or in favor of the government in office. However, we have to know what our convictions are, the ones that sustain us, and what we believe in. In a few moments, I'll speak on this, but I'd like to give thanks especially to all those that are present here today. Thanks for your faithfulness. Thanks for being there. They were just telling me that there are other churches that are going through it in Downey, in the center of Los Angeles. There are raids there, protests. There are churches, congregations that literally cannot open or they're afraid to. So we're doubly grateful that on Father's Day, on a celebratory day, during such rough times, you've decided to give your first fruits to the Lord. You've said, Sunday will go as it's always gone in my life. I'd like to give thanks to you for that. No matter each person's immigration status, because I know I've seen there's someone that's probably speculating, saying, whoa, those that are there, it's because they don't have any issues. No, we always trust in the Lord during moments of the pandemic, during the moments of epidemic, during the moments of immigration raids, during moments of war, during moments of peace. God continues to be on His throne, and that's what always blesses us. Yes? Very well. Are we ready? Yes or no? Very well. This message is directed specifically and punctually to those that in these last days, in these last months, or during this year, have felt like giving up, like throwing in the towel, letting your arms down. It's likely that there are people here and at home that in this very moment are asking themselves, how can this be happening to me? Or how can this be happening to my family? In any area with any tragedy or misfortune that has come about. Your life, my life, obviously are different. The same way each person's life here is different, but what we have in common is the overwhelming feelings that are produced with things like betrayal, addiction, mental illness, division, lies, deceit, sadness, discouragement, fear, legal battles, shame, embarrassment, guilt, depression, oppression. This week, we found out, I said this just before we connected to the live stream, but we learned of a new conflict in the Middle East. We all know that Israel is God's clock and a stopwatch, and in one way or another, it marks the beat of the rest of the planet. It's not a minor detail, even though it's happening far away geographically. But we woke up with the news that there's now a new conflict with Israel and Iran, added to what's locally happening here with the immigration raids, massive immigration raids here in California and in other parts of the U.S., the offensive posture of the current government against undocumented immigrants. No matter the laws, we're not going to debate them here because that doesn't correspond to us. It's surprising to see the discourse of hate, the tension that's in the atmosphere. Obviously, the discourse of hate, or what's done with a violent bias, it also unchains violent protests across the country. I insist, I'm not justifying the raids, nor the protests or riots. What I'm trying to say is that this is like a domino effect, and we're living in absolute violence and tension across the world. In our countries, from Mexico all the way to Argentina, the situation isn't much better. In each nation I've been in all the countries, there's a social tension, a spasm of violence, nothing like we've ever seen in many, many years. We're living in a pandemic of violence. A pandemic of violence that's no longer expected but explicit from government officials and the opposition. We're living under the sensation that our safeness is no longer that safe. And the home where we could shelter away and rest, wherever that home is located, now it's being dismantled piece by piece. And like I said, during the pandemic, as it was just getting started during 2020, on certain occasions, I said that God allows our nest to be spoiled. God allows it. And He does this to teach us how to fly. I'm convinced that God and the enemy are not like Barca versus Real Madrid, where sometimes one wins and the other times the other wins. No, every time the enemy does something, it's with God's sovereign permission. And many, for a long time, we've atrophied our wings, and our tendency has been to remain comfortable in our nests. But life has taught us that what sometimes cannot accomplish comfort or the certainty of a nest, it's accomplished when the nest is agitated. If you look at human history, we'll see that in each season, the nest is always agitated with wars, pandemics, rumors of war, earthquakes, with weather disasters, tsunamis. From time to time, the nest is agitated to awaken the church. Many congregations begin to become nest churches, where what is valued most is comfort, empowerment, security, playing at spiritual war, but it's always just a game. Decreeing, proclaiming that God will give me the car. I took the home by faith. I declare that I'll be healed. And we have these conferences where we play at spiritual warfare, but in reality, we don't affect anyone or anything. But in these difficult moments, we cannot keep quiet and again stay in our nests, declaring that these things will pass. No, these things have to happen. I'm going to tell you what you don't want to hear, but these things need to happen. It would be a fallacy to the word if I said, oh, these things just got out of control. It seems like God was distracted this week. Or maybe he was watching the Club World Cup, and that's why he missed out on what's happening. No! The Apostle Paul said, all of creation groans with birthing pains. Is it necessary for me to ask the women here that have given birth if it's painful to give birth? Is it necessary for us to ask us men? Have no clue. We think it's like a cold. But women, no. Paul could have said, creation is groaning like a man with migraines. Creation groans like you have a toothache. No, but it says the pains of childbirth for salvation that hasn't come yet. Now we always speak about wanting to give birth to that redemption, but when the birth pains come about, we want to stop the birth, or we want an epidural. We say, God, no, we don't want the pain. Job 29:18, the prophet adds, I thought I will die in my own house. Job said it. I thought I would die in my own house with my loved ones surrounded by them. But God said, nope, I didn't bless you to die in your nest. I'm going to take you to a height that not all birds can fly to. I'm going to remove your comfort zone, Job, so that you can reach a level that you never dreamt of. And so spiritual warfare, the relentless spiritual warfare that has come about is real. It's not prophetic. It's not about declaring a word. No, it's a real battle. And I'm sorry to say this, but we're living it across the globe. It's just a little bit of an attack that'll get worse. Things will not get better. Maybe this ends. Maybe this season that we're living here in the United States passes, because it will pass. Because any world leader will see the economic loss due to hormonal decisions. This will pass, but other things will come, and I don't want you to say later on, Dante, you didn't tell me it would get worse. No, let me tell you now, it'll get worse, and I know you're not going to say amen. The battlefield is not just in heaven, in the celestial places. No, there's also a very strong battle being fought in our minds. There's a strong battle in our minds. With the accelerated advancement of technology, with the fluency of news that we have on our cell phones, you no longer have to be watching a TV. You don't have to buy the newspaper. If you just search up raids, then the algorithm says, all right, let's talk to this guy about everything. And you'll find everything. New laws in the spiritual realm have been decreed, and this has been done to pervert, to corrupt. To pervert means to deviate from the original use. To corrupt and pervert the minds of our children, the minds of our families. And by fortune, God left us a survival guide because He would never leave us alone. As I said last Sunday, whatever we decide, whatever we do in times of war are pre-made decisions made during times of peace. During times of peace is when we make decisions. We make our convictions clear so that during times of war we don't doubt. God has already prepared us for these war-like, gloomy, tremulous, hectic days. Paraphrasing the description that Paul uses in the last days in 2 Timothy 3:2, he says, people will be lovers of themselves. A pandemic of selfishness, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good. And we're living in this generation of without fear of God, without gratitude, without forgiveness. This is the generation that we're living in. It's not an apocalyptic generation that'll make it further. No, this is the generation lacking so much, lacking fear of God. A generation that doesn't know the God of their parents. But the good thing in all this is that in one way or another, as we said earlier, everything is still under God's control. He's still on His throne. He hasn't moved from His throne. Do we agree? He hasn't moved. So, we all like the nest. Who doesn't like comfort and the times and seasons of peace and tranquility? But He wants us to discover our wings of faith, and there's no other way for us to discover them if He doesn't rustle our nest. He wants us to experiment the joy of flying at a height of faith, at a level of spirituality that we have never reached. Before the pandemic of 2020, many of us were comfortable. I was one of them. I was comfortable playing at church. When I say playing, I don't mean it in a pejorative term. I mean, no, it's to say, our main thought was, let's have conferences from time to time. Let's see what the church is asking for. What are their needs? There are women that want a women's group. Let's do it. We have the building for it. What are the youth asking for? They want to gather, but the younger ones don't want to gather with the older ones, so let's have an adolescence group, and then let's have older adolescents, and then hairy adolescents, and then hairless adolescents, and let's have a singles group. But the 20-year-olds can't gather with the 40-year-olds because they think that they're too old, and then, like any other church, when you begin to get involved in the internal business of the church, it never would have occurred to us to feed the world. If you would have asked me, why don't you help Africa? I would have said, well, Africa's far away. What about Cuba? Well, what do we have to do with Cuba? Let the churches in Miami help out Cuba. Mexico? Well, thank God many of them have crossed over already. What about Argentina? Well, I'm gone. You might think, well, how selfish. It's our environment takes us and molds us. The perspective changes. There was a need for a pandemic. Some people think that the pandemic was a pause and then they continued their lives right after. They didn't realize there was a 9/11 that changed our way of seeing life. Life isn't the way it was before COVID, before 2020. And just like 9/11 changed our way of traveling by plane, the pandemic changed our way of seeing the church, amongst other things. Businesses changed. Companies understood that they didn't need offices anymore. They didn't need desks. There are buildings that are ghost towns in Manhattan. They're empty because everyone discovered that working from home could be more effective. The world changed, and pastors and leaders that thought that it was a pause, and then they thought that they would have their people as slaves again with 40 gatherings a week. Don't miss this gathering. Don't miss this meeting. Don't miss this meeting. I'm going to put this leader to control you. They don't understand that the pandemic ended. The pandemic ended the silence of the lambs. It ended the thought of, well, I'm scared that if I don't go to church on a Sunday, I'm going to lose my coverage. No, the Lord allowed our nest to be spoiled with one purpose, so that true worshipers would arise, so that people would begin to seek God on their own accounts, not repeating ridiculous phrases in the temple. And God is allowing us to live this era, this prophetic time, and we have to go through it, but go through it without the noise of the news, without the noise on social media. They cannot regulate our mood. Not Fox, not CNN, not Telemundo, not Univision. They cannot regulate our mood. Our mood is regulated and founded on the rock who is Christ. What's the worst that can happen to us? That we repeat the same story from the pandemic, that our emotions depend on the news, that fear and faith are regulated by what is said. Because in these difficult days, I insist, is when you'll see if we're founded on quicksand or upon the firm rock. It's always happened like this. Throughout the history of nations, wars have come about, literal wars, where the church has had to sustain itself upon the faith that was preached during times of peace. A few days ago, a reporter was asking me what times I thought we were living in at a global level. What diagnosis could I give to what was happening? I don't have the messianic complex of saying I have the truth, but I told them something that I read and I thought was interesting. I said, I'm convinced that we've crossed, like humanity, the Rubicon. In ancient Rome, the Rubicon was a small channel located in northern Italy, which was the border for Rome itself. If a general crossed that canal with his army, it was an act of hostility, a civil war. That's where they coined the military term, crossing the Rubicon. That's a phrase that means making an irreversible decision, a point of no return, a decisive point. The Rubicon is a small canal that if it was crossed during times of, then it meant war. This is where Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon with his troops, starting a civil war against Pompey in ancient Rome. And the world has already crossed this point of no return. It seems like the world evolved. If you take a quick glance, you might say, well, we haven't evolved as a society. No, we haven't evolved. We've become involved. We've heard a lot about cancel culture. It didn't exist before. Cancel culture is a social phenomenon where any individual can be excluded. They get boycotted due to their actions or opinions that are considered offensive to a certain collective, unacceptable to the community, and you say, well, we evolved because now you cannot openly discriminate. But deep down, what that cancel culture is hiding is a change of values, where the good is bad and where bad is now good. And much before cancel culture infiltrated the world, first it infiltrated the walls of the church. Churches succumbed to that dangerous silence. We said, no, let's not speak about sin so directly and offensively because people might get hurt. Let's talk about mistakes. But nobody goes to hell due to mistakes. They go to hell for sin. Well, we would say, no, let's not mention sin. Let's not talk about repentance too much either because for the people, it's not psychologically good. And let's also not mention certain sensitive topics that are in the Bible that are condemned. But since there's so much sexual diversity, maybe they'll cancel us on YouTube or on social media. So cancel culture came into the church long before it entered Hollywood or the world. So it's more comfortable to ignore this moral fall and preach from the certainty of our spiritual nest. And that's something God won't tolerate. We declare, we confess. On Sundays, look at other churches' live streams. You'll see that they declare positivity, they decree, they all compete to be the best motivational coaches. But Matthew 24:5 warns us, you will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. One case is war, another case is raids, like here in the U.S. Imagine if Russia or China throws these bombs at you. The Lord says, such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Which means that this won't happen after the end. This will happen before the end. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Of course, you read this and you say, wow, he shouldn't say this because next Sunday no one will be here, because it's a terrible report. Without a doubt, it's a bad report. But then the Lord adds, then this gospel will be preached throughout the world because people will need it. The gospel will be preached. The only moment for months that churches were full was right after 9/11. People ran back to churches, even to synagogues or mosques, basilicas, Catholic churches. When the nest is agitated, when we see how defenseless we are due to a war or a pandemic or an attack, then a marvelous report is produced. We have to turn back to God. If only God didn't have to treat us as children of rigor, and if only we understood. But we always look for the comfort of our nests. Ergo, I don't want to sound like someone that's insensitive or lacks empathy, that doesn't understand each person's need. I get it, and I also understand the fear. I know people that have spent their last cent of optimism in their battle against cancer. Because other battles are collective, and you find people that are living what we are, but cancer's almost solitary, where you with other strangers have to submit to chemotherapy, dialysis in the case of kidney issues. And I know people that have suffered aggressive chemotherapy, and they defended their case before God. Well, spiritual warriors that stood on the front lines and clinged on to hope. They confessed their healing, but I also know that when they went back to a checkup, instead of the tumor reducing, it had expanded. Some people have been healed, others have not. And maybe you know what that return trip home was like when they told you your kidneys are failing. There's too much protein in your blood. Maybe you know how that dinner felt that very night around the table. I'm not a scammer. I'm not a coward. I know that we all live difficult times. Calamities, misfortunes. They betray us. They hurt us, whether we're Christians or not. And the great secret is not about building a church that can hide behind a message that says, reject the bad and it'll go away. Proclaim that it'll go away. Because then when it doesn't go away, when the illness remains, when they take our homes, when the divorce comes along, we begin to think that we are doing something wrong. As I always say, the famous, you must have done something wrong. And then you add a cold dose of guilt, and you think, what am I doing wrong that God is punishing me? No, we cannot build the church behind positivity. We have to preach more than ever that we have to be built on the solid foundation of God's word. Things will get ugly. Yes, they will. But blessed are those who are founded upon the rock, which is Christ. We're founded upon Him, yes? So, like when crisis comes to our life, as it were, a parade of excavators ready to remove our foundations, instead of clinging onto our nest, the nest can be symbolized by our bank account, our home, the papers that we're working on, our immigration status. Whatever certainty we feel will allow us to be happy. Instead of clinging onto the nest, we have to take advantage and say, Lord, if this moves, it's because you want me to fly high. That's why we cannot obviate or ignore that in the hands of the great medic, pain and crisis always have a purpose. Always. Like a scalpel in the hands of a surgeon that we know won't hurt us. When God has a scalpel, He's like a surgeon. His purpose is not to harm us, but to help us, to elevate our faith. And if we're willing to learn, then God will mold us. As if we're pieces of mud, we say, God, use me. I'm going to trust in you. I'm going to be prudent, like during the pandemic, but we say, I'm going to trust in you. Now, if we resist, God doesn't say, all right, I'll leave you. No, he twists us as if we were metal sheets, and if we're too foolish, then he chisels us down and sculpts us like hard blocks of marble. But in any case, he's going to work with us. He loves us too much to lose us. He loves us too much to forget us. So the great medic never stops giving us treatment for our character. Never. When we believe we've reached the American dream and credit becomes our God and the dollar becomes our God, he reminds us how defenseless we are. When in our countries we say, finally a right-wing government, I was tired of the left. God shows us how defenseless we are. When we say, finally a left-wing government, we're tired of the right. God shows how defenseless they are. Because the solution to the world isn't held by Milei, Trump, or Bukele. No, the king who is on his throne. Yes or no? So that we trust in the true God. And so God teaches us patience. How? By making us wait for what we want. He teaches us wisdom by allowing us to fail, because there's nothing that teaches more than errors themselves. Other people's errors don't give us wisdom. They give us things to gossip about, but they don't give us wisdom. Teaches us humility under the strict and infallible thorn therapy. When the mother eagle waits for her offspring, she builds a soft nest on the edge of a cliff with thorns and branches and covers it with soft feathers. When the offspring is old enough to live on its own, the mother eagle removes the mattress, the comfortable mattress of soft feathers, until only the thorns are left that bring discomfort to the new creature. And so those thorns obligate the offspring to fly. Eagles never fix their offspring's dependency. Maybe you have to put thorns in your child's mattress. Eagles either fly or they fly. So they take away the soft feathers, and when they feel the thorns, they jump out and they try to fly. Try again. You either fly or you fly. Here is a certain death. Over there is a probable death. So you have to choose between the certain death of the nest or the probable death of flying. Obviously, everybody flies. Everybody runs the risk. And with that being said, I'd like to speak to you about the only biblical thorn, or the most famous one in all of Scripture. That in my humble experience, the number one obstacle to a Christian life is not sexual immorality. I'm not discrediting it. I'm just saying it's not the number one obstacle. Obviously, these two always take all the publicity. This with greed, they tend to be the most sensational, the most spoken about. Sexual sin awakens our curiosity of wanting to know who and what and how and why and how long. We love reading that preachers were caught with millions of dollars and cars and homes, and this always calls to our attention. However, I sustain that the true enemy often it goes unnoticed, and it's rarely on the news, and it's pride. And that's what God always wants to treat with us when He ruffles the nest across the world. Undoubtedly, the pandemic took all of our pride when we could all die no matter the age. Whether or not we lived in Beverly Hills or if we were living in Skid Row. I know this about pride. When I say pride, you say, well, it's an Argentinian problem. No, that's a generalization. I have an Argentinian pastor, a friend, that says, it's a lie that us Argentinians are arrogant. Some of us are perfect. But this disease of pride ends up becoming a condition that disfigures our character. We don't realize it. Those that have their internal world in disorder are very confused about their own identity. And there are people that cannot separate the role that they play from the person that they truly are. And careful, pride is not just for the rich. I've seen many poor people that are very proud and rich people that are very simple. But there are many people that cannot see the dichotomy of who they show in public and who they are in intimacy. In the last years, because of my TV show, I've had to interview many famous people. Some of them are pathetic because they believe their own character. There's nothing worse than seeing a famous person that thinks they're famous. Because there's a person that works and, famous inherent to what they do. But there are others that work as a famous person. They arrive and they say, "Hey, Dante, how's it going? Good? Hey, have you seen my muscles lately? I got a new butt. Guys. Oh. A guy that tells you, "Hey, I just got a new butt." What are you going to say to him? "Oh, how beautiful." What do you want me to say? They ate the character because their identities are linked to what they do. So many of us face the temptation of starting to believe our own Instagram statuses. It's fine. Instagram is full of filters. But the problem is believing that you're walking around life with those filters on. When that happens to us, our personality gradually gets infected with the messianic fantasy. When we forget who we are and we don't order our internal world, we distort our true identity. And so arrogance, as I always say, it's a backpack that God doesn't want us to carry. God isn't displeased by arrogance. He doesn't dislike it. He hates it. He despises it. The same thing that a meal infested by worms produces to us. That's what pride and arrogance produce in God's stomach. Pride and arrogance. Proverbs 8:13 says, "I hate pride and arrogance." Philippians 2:3 says, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit." 1 Samuel 2:3, "Do not keep talking so proudly or let your mouth speak such arrogance." 1 Peter 5:5. God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Proverbs 16:18. Proverbs 14:25. There's nothing that justifies our arrogance. It's like a fly that lands on the elephant's ear, and after the elephant crosses a bridge, the fly says, "Oh, look, we crossed the bridge." What do you mean we crossed the bridge? You were traveling on the elephant's ear. Why does God hate it? Well, because you don't give a prize to the canvas that the painter used. There's never a Pulitzer for the ink or paper that the reporter used. There are no diplomas for the scalpel that the surgeon uses. So, instruments never receive credit for what they do. We are not deserving of the applause. And it's not because God has an ego problem. No, we do. Because it's not enough for us to have a bit of praise. We always want to swallow it all up. That's why there's so many people that are addicted to likes and comments. They take 350 pictures until they finally post one, waiting to see what people say, and it's not enough to just get one like. Praise and applause atrophy our brains. And so that's where God applies the Thorn therapy. It's God's preferred treatment to bring us down a peg. And now, I'm conscious that I'm going to touch certain sacred cows. I'm going to hurt people's theology. Not here, you're all used to me, but out there. Every time you think about the Apostle Paul, our collective subconscious makes us see him as someone angelic, diaphanous, with a brilliant halo floating upon his head. However, his very words show a different face. When you look at the apostle's biography, you see that he was once a proud man, he was irate, he was choleric, aggressive, very furious, explosive, and for God to be able to use Paul, he had to deal with all these things that were deeply rooted in his character. You think that when you convert to the Lord, it's like, oh, you become a nun. No. Our temperament continues on. We were still born in the place where we were born. We were still brought up how we were brought up. After that, everything is then submitted to the feet of Christ. But it's not that God turns off our brains and turns off our temperament. In fact, Paul writes in Philippians 3:4, he says, if someone else thinks they have reasons to put confidence in the flesh, I have more. He says, I have credentials to show off. He says, in fact, if someone else thinks they have reasons to put confidence in their own efforts, you can't imagine what I have. And then the Argentinian comes out from within. Paul, he says, circumcised on the 8th day of the people of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews in regard to the law, a Pharisee, as for zeal, persecuting the church. As for righteousness based on the law, faultless. He said, I obeyed the law perfectly. And besides this, Paul also had a great education and cultural background. In Acts 22:3, Paul says, I am a Jew born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city. I studied under Gamaliel and was thoroughly trained in the law of our ancestors. It's as if to say he studied at Harvard. He says, I was thoroughly trained in the law of our ancestors. I was just as zealous for God as any of you are today, in all that he did, just as you are now. So if there's anyone that could be conceited, it was Paul. Intelligent, educated, a genius, shrewd. He had all the pathogens to look like a terminal version of pride. The perfect Argentinian. It's very possible that his colleagues considered Paul to be a brilliant person, perceptive, very sharp, ironic, well-versed, educated. These people are very difficult to debate with because they're always going to find a reason to be right. However, Paul had many, many, many battles in his private life, and he doesn't hide them. In his second letter to Corinthians, Paul mentions that he had a spiritual experience that was so intense and exceptional that he's not even able to describe it in detail. He at a certain point he says, there are no words in the dictionary, in language, in Greek, not even in Latin, that can illustrate or articulate what I lived. And he said something sort of like this. He said, 14 years ago, I was caught up to the third heaven, to paradise, and I heard things and I saw things that were so incredible that no one is permitted to tell. It's inexpressible. No human being is permitted to tell. So the man isn't sure if he was taken up in the body, if he had an out-of-body experience to the kingdom of heaven. All he knows is that he was invited to get to know heaven. I was invited to get to know God's throne. I don't know if some angels said, hey, come on, let's go. Where? Let's go up. And they elevated him. But you know what's interesting to me? As far as we know, it's the first time he shares it after 14 years of the experience. Imagine a modern-day apostle that travels to heaven today? He wouldn't wait a single minute to share his experience on Enlace or TBN. Let's not talk about others. What if one of us lived something like this? I'm not talking about getting to know heaven. Let's just say we saw an angel's pinky finger. First, we'd write a book. with details. Second, we'll go on a world tour sharing our experience. I saw Michael's finger. Not Luis Miguel, Michael. Third, we'll sell the rights to Netflix. All right. A week ago, I was reading that there are people that publish that a cloud of glory had come into a church. There was like a fog in a church. I was tempted to making smoke here, maybe with some hot dogs at least, but Paul never tried to commercialize the experience. He never published a story. There is no chapter, no book, which is called Paul's Trip to Heaven. He hated the idea that he could be placed on a pedestal. And I'm sure of why this was. Because Thorn therapy opened up holes in his pride. After he mentions his trip to paradise, that close encounter of that fourth kind, Paul tells us the method that God used to not allow him to strut around like a pompous, ostentatious braggart. Instead, he chose to boast about his weakness. God took him to heaven, but he brought him down a peg. So Paul says, therefore, in order to keep me from being conceited, and you have to be brave to say something like that, right? Because who here is proud? No one, right? No one. Paul says, in order to keep me from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan. You truly have to recognize that you have a messenger of Satan stuck to you. We like to say I have the Holy Spirit, the angels cover me, but to say that you have a messenger of Satan, it's like saying I travel with my mother-in-law everywhere I go, right? Oh, I'm sorry, I don't want to offend Satan, but anyways. No. I was given a messenger of Satan to torment me. Torment me. Don't miss out on this word, to torment me. God allows something to torment me. What would we say nowadays? That's not from God. Don't allow anything to torment you. But Paul says, I have a messenger that torments me. Allowed by God, because if not, I would become conceited. That stops me from becoming too proud. I don't know why we've preached this more when there's so much revelation there. We hate when bad things happen to us because immediately we think, well, if Satan is beating me up, it's because I did something wrong, and that's why God is no longer protecting me. But what about when God allows it? Not too long ago, this about pride, it's hard for us to recognize, but I recently sent an audio. He's coming to the second service. He's not coming to preach, but he's coming with his family to the second service. But I said to Marcus in an audio message, I said, now that we're older, both of us, obviously he's much older than I am, right? But I started to think, why weren't we great friends when we were young? Because we would encounter. We met 35 years ago. We would see each other in different parts of the world. We coincided many times, but we were never friends until now. Now we don't even remember what being friends means or what it's for. And Marcos answered me and said, well, just remember, it was the time in which we both wanted to conquer the world. But each person goes their own way without giving anyone credit. And I said, you know, he was right. We were like Pinky in the Brain, but fighting against one another. I'm going to speak about Marcos, but when I was younger, I coveted other people's praise. I'm not going to justify pride or anything, but in a foolish attempt to try and explain myself, I came from a childhood where I was unrecognized. I had no validation, and suddenly I discovered all the validation in what I do. So I wanted to fabricate opportunities, and everything we fabricate through human effort doesn't come with God's guarantee. But obviously, God began to work in me to crucify my motivations. If not today, I'd be unbearably conceited. But he crucified these motivations in the only way that you can crucify anything. A crucifixion to your pride and your ego, with thorns, with nails, and on more than one occasion I went through a lot of shame. I always give thanks to God for the invention of YouTube and cell phones long after it had begun, because there is no registry. I always talk about one of the many embarrassing moments that I had in La Paz, Bolivia, during one of the very first events that I was invited as an embryonic preacher, because I was a sort of young phenomenon. I was a young preacher. They called and said, okay, we have a 21-year-old young man who's going to preach to us. I was very immature, very insecure. And I prepared the only sermon that I knew by memory. Naomi. I preached Naomi, Naomi 2, Naomi 3, Naomi 4, the revenge of Naomi. Naomi attacks again. Naomi recharged. I had all of it. Naomi, final destination. I would give it different titles with the same message. And in the middle of the message, I remember I did this. Something that you have to always avoid. But I hit my mouth with the microphone, and I saw that one of my teeth flew out. But I saw something white fly out. Not only did it fly out, but it hit a pastor's wife sitting in the front row right in the forehead. I know the pastor and the wife, but I'm not going to say who they are. I was left like Luis Miguel before he joined his two front teeth. And since not everyone saw, I decided to mask the misfortune by keeping the microphone close to my mouth like Julio Iglesias. But things got worse, because a strange whistle began to come out that I couldn't control. And I would say, I never desired the rapture more than I did in that very instant. Well, the thing is that my ego and my dignity that night went back to Argentina, and I stayed alone in Bolivia. And if that weren't enough, the victim in question, which had the mark of the tooth on her forehead, once the service was over, she returned the tooth wrapped up in a handkerchief and said, I think this belongs to you. How terrible. I didn't look her in the face. I said, thank you, with the same whistle that I had preached with. I put it in my pocket, and then I preached that I would never see this woman again, that God would give her amnesia, along with the rest of the congregation, and what's better, that Bolivia as a whole forget that day even happened. It made me remember the story of that young preacher who went up on the altar on the stage with his ego inflated, and his nerves made him mess up, and he came down humbled, and the great preacher Spurgeon said to him, young man, had you gone up the way you came down, you would have came down the way you went up. The point is that many times God made me come down humbled because he had to deal with me. The thing is that when God began to filter my motivations, I stopped seeking out opportunities, and that's when the opportunities began to seek me. But for that to happen, a lot of water had to go under the bridge. Now, what is that thorn that Paul mentions? Why would God use this method to hurt and beat down Paul's pride? Why is such a devastating, relentless pain? Well, immediately nobody interprets that Paul's thorn was a literal thorn. It wasn't a spike. It was an allegory, a metaphor. And there are many theories of what it could have been, and many of them are credible. I can only mention some, but some assume or suggest that the thorn was referring to the gamma of suffering that Paul described, which ended up being a thorn. He had put up with tribulations, imprisonment, abandonment, betrayal. Maybe he meant to say that everything he did becomes complex. Other commentators say, no, maybe not. Maybe Paul battled with certain sexual temptations, because a celibate life doesn't tend to be easy. So maybe he battled with certain sexual temptation that doesn't appear explicitly. Others say, no, it was the great Paul. Yeah, but he was a man. Maybe the thorn was a physical impediment. Maybe a disfiguration, a chronic illness, severe migraines, common fevers, maybe an impediment to speak. Maybe it was an impediment in his sight. Others coincide with this more. In Galatians 4:15, Paul says, I can testify that if you could have done so, you would have torn out your eyes and given them to me, which gives us a hint that maybe he didn't see well. And at the end of that, he says, look at what great letters I'm using to write these words. Maybe he had to depend on secretaries or scribes to read and write what he could barely see. Maybe Paul had glaucoma or cataracts. That would explain a lot of his problems. But no matter what his thorn was, we have to imagine a Paul distinct to how religion illustrates him. I see him as a hunched-over old man with his eyes glued to the ground the majority of time, struggling with physical pain. That's how I would cast Paul if I were making a movie of him. I can imagine him reading his letters, having to take a deep breath and recover strength to be able to continue speaking. Because they're not the words of an empowered theologian that speculates about the external world from his comfortable office chair. No, his words were forged on the anvil of pain, written with ink of pain, ink of blood. But what about us? What chronic thorn are we battling against? What pain do we have? Do we feel? Are we overwhelmed by a physical or mental issue or an emotional issue? What is our thorn therapy that we've been praying and praying and praying and praying for? And it seems like God answers everything except for that thorn, which shows us or leads us to believe that not necessarily that God is against us because he blesses us, but we've begged God to remove it. How many times have we begged or negotiated, God, if you take it away, then I'll be able to do this, and I promise that if you give me and if you do, why should we battle with this weakness? What weakness are you battling with that you turn back to again and again and again and again? Paul begs the Lord that he remove the thorn, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And you might say, well, 3 times compared to how many times I've prayed is not a lot. But the word that's translated as begged implies much more than a petition. Paul begged. He impulsed, he instigated, he cried out for help. It's not the type of prayer that's, Lord, let me find some parking at the mall, please. Please don't let my mother-in-law come over for Christmas. No, not those superfluous prayers. Paul's prayer is the one that makes us fall on our face. A cry of agony, to sweat blood because your little daughter, your little son is in the hospital going through intervention, for example. You're on the outside and the doctor doesn't say anything, not even if the operation is going well. And any face of worry that you see in nurses, you assume that it has to do with your child's life. That's what I'm talking about. And despite the heartbreaking pain, God never freed Paul from his pain. Why? Because there was a purpose behind the thorn. And God didn't say, no. No, in fact, he revealed the purpose behind the thorn in his flesh. He told him why. He said why. He said, Paul, the gravitational force of your ego is always relentless. It's just that evangelicals and Christians, we cover it with that thin layer of spirituality. We develop our own respective celebrity. We prefer to be called bishops, apostles, prophets, pastor, and out of fear of being negatively influenced by culture, secular culture, we use religion but to feel distinct. But not as a way of getting closer to others, but as a way of justifying segregation. We're very discriminatory as evangelicals. We discriminate those that think differently. We discriminate Catholics. We discriminate Jehovah's Witness. We discriminate because you can be on the opposite pole of the doctrines. But we discriminate. There was people writing online. They were very upset because sometimes we would furnish the home of a woman that had a virgin statue in the corner of her home. And people would say, you took them a TV and you took them a refrigerator. Why don't you break their statue? Well, poor woman. What do I have to do with what she believes in? The Lord didn't say that we should love and do good for those that believe the same things we do. No, in fact, He encouraged us and ordered us to love our enemies. So not only does God say to Paul no, but He also encourages him. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, He says, my grace is sufficient for you. That's all you need. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. In your thorn, He said, I'm going to bless you better with that thorn than if you didn't have it. My grace is sufficient. And seeing the current events, I don't have reason to believe that God has stopped using that thorn therapy to deal with that illness of pride. The pride in Americans and Hispanics and Mexicans and Argentinians and Colombians and Salvadorians. All of us at one point or another. I know that this thorn therapy is what God uses because we like to strut often. They teach us a lesson of humility. If you know yourself well, you cannot believe what you sell. People that believe what they sell is because they don't know themselves well. They haven't looked in the mirror for a while. Above all, those of us that believe that we're very intelligent, talented, or profoundly spiritual, prime matter to be pride. These thorns remind us that we're profoundly human. Martin Luther commented this paradox and said, who has ever heard about weak power, or what's more absurd, that power can increase in weakness? It's a contradiction about having power and weakness. We're never going to read that in the Fortune magazine. We'll never see it in Marvel or DC Comics. Never. We're never going to hear a TED Talk about this. Empower yourself by being weaker. Never. We won't hear it in the highest fears of the world. Ever. And sadly, it's not something that we hear amongst each other. What is needed to convince ourselves, to convince us that in God's spiritual economy, pride comes before the fall? How many more brave men and women have to fall so that we realize, pride comes before destruction? Show me someone that has fallen, and you'll see that I'm going to show you someone that had pride before it. What do we need to understand? That weakness and vulnerability are spiritually powerful. If in this moment there are people here that are saying, I feel weak, well, God's power will flow in your life more than ever, in your weakness, in your vulnerability, even in that sort of fear. Does someone believe it, yes or no? Some years ago, I went to speak with businessmen in Uruguay in a hotel, and late into the night, after I made it back to the hotel, a couple was waiting for me out on the sidewalk. The gentleman spoke first, and he explained what was happening. He said, I beg that you give me a few minutes. I wanted to go to my room quickly. It was late. It was 1:32 a.m. in Montevideo. He said, a few minutes, or I need a few minutes. My wife had a serious car accident months ago, and she lost all her memory. And when she woke up, we had to show her photographs of her children, and being her husband, I had to introduce myself again. But as soon as she opened her eyes and got out of the coma, she said, I have to see Dante Gebel. And he said, that left me surprised. I said to her, you're sure that you're married? You know that you're married to me, right? And she said, I need to see the preacher. I have a message for him. And as she recovered her memory, the memory of her children, her husband, but she had to give that message to Dante Gebel. And so the wife comes up to me Trembling, she gave me a small piece of paper folded up, and she said, "Take this." And she was shaking. And they left in silence that early morning. Danny Darling was with me, our executive pastor, and as soon as we got into the elevator, I remember that I said to him, "Did you see that? This woman was in a coma. And while she was in a coma, God gave her a message for me. Let's write a book. Let's take it to Netflix." No. No, because I thought, if she thought of me as soon as she woke up, it has to be a powerful message. What didn't make sense to me was how a powerful message could fit on a small piece of paper. I thought maybe there would be a link on there for me to search, or maybe it was just Argentina will win all the World Cups while you're alive. A gift I want to give you. But I opened up the small paper and it contained these words. Dante, my grace and power are sufficient. My power will always be perfected in your weakness. I didn't applaud. I said, "Really? She was in a coma and she waited until 2 a.m. at this hotel to give me this? I have it in the Bible already." And back then I couldn't recognize the depths of these words and why God sent me this reminder. I cannot tell you how many times these words have helped me in the ditches of pain and the alleyways of despair. Remember that my grace will be sufficient. It'll be all you need. My grace. I know the thorns of suffering are not easy to bear with. In fact, it's possible that here at home there are people that experimented deep suffering that I have never known, nor will I ever live through. So I'm not going to give you the impression that I'm the model to follow on how to go through suffering, because I haven't lived hard things like many people have. I know it's easier to preach about this topic than living it in a coherent way. But I do believe that we have to find God's power in our weakness. We have to be able to say, in this moment, all I need is God's grace. I confess that I've battled and that I still battle with many, many thorns that I'm not going to share with you because they're mine. You don't care. But I have many weaknesses, many that I'm aware of, many that I'm not aware of, that God will continue to reveal little by little. I have difficulties. I'm weak. I'm vulnerable. I suffer all the attacks that mortals do. And that's why I value grace like no other. That's why I never dare to judge others, to condemn others. There is no sin that frightens me or that makes me say, "Oh, well, that goes above what I can tolerate." I know that grace is abundant for any type of sin. And when Paul accepted what God was doing, he said, "That is why I delight in my weakness. I rejoice about my weakness." Who rejoices over weaknesses? Paul does. I rejoice about insults, suffering for Christ, because when I am weak, God says that then I am strong. And so insults didn't offend Paul. Difficulties didn't discourage him. Persecution didn't break him down. ICE wasn't being followed by Paul. ICE wasn't following Paul. Immigration wasn't after Paul. No, he would have given thanks for something as trivial as that. He would have said, "That's it? That I'm being deported to my country?" No. Paul was being persecuted to be decapitated. Not for him to lose his papers or to lose his status. No, to be decapitated. That's persecution. And when Paul was in his weakest position, God was in him. And that was the strongest moment. And I insist, though it sounds like a resigned phrase, it implies much faith. We said this a couple weeks ago for a reason. Though the new president in any of the countries is worse than the last president, with all things I will trust in the Lord. With all things, in all things. Trust doesn't have to do with the government. Though tomorrow I wake up to the news that a new pandemic has come along that could once again possibly kill me, with everything I will trust in the Lord. Though tomorrow they promote laws of hate and discriminate against me due to a certain particular condition, I will trust in the Lord my God. Though they deport me, And I have to go back to where I came from. In all things I will trust in my Lord. Let whatever needs to happen, happen. That in everything I will trust in my Lord. That is the type of declaration that God is asking for today. Now, I can hear, and that's what the Holy Spirit is for, to discern. I can hear what some people are saying. Of course, you're not on the side of Latin Americans. You have papers. You don't care. No, what I'm saying is it doesn't matter. I can die. I'm traveling to Argentina every week. Maybe they don't let me back in. What do I know? That's not what I want. But in all things, I will rejoice in the Lord, because I understand that nothing will happen if God, unless God permits it. I know that if I'm going to take a test and I do well on the test, but they say no to me, it's not good, turn back. That's God, because I did my best. But I can also not do well, and if God wants, He'll says, continue on, it's done. And I've lived through that hundreds of times. When you understand truly what God's sovereignty is, it doesn't mean, well, I won't do anything, God's in charge. No, you make your best effort. You take preventive actions. You do what you can, but in the end, you trust in God, because if not, what do we believe in? This is all a joke then. It's a bad joke. What do we believe in? If when things get ugly, the way the Lord said that they would, if things will get worse, then immediately we doubt about God's coverage. Either God brought us here and sustains us, or He didn't. And if God didn't bring us, then it's a fallacy to remain where God didn't bring us to. And if God brought us, then there's nothing. There's no one that can move you. It's God that sustains us. That's what you have to realize. God is the one that holds us up. He's the one that brings us. So maybe now we're feeling a thorn therapy on behalf of the Father. And the thorn that is apparently hurting us now is in fact healing us. It can seem like it's harming us, but that's not the case. It's not being cut. It's pruning. Pruning always brings new sprouts. I know this will hurt certain people's susceptibility, but we would have died like any other church. We never would have looked outside. We never would have sent in 5 years $47 million to the rest of the world, to all the people in need. You know what we would have done? We would have bought another building by now. We would have a place for camps, surely, because that's where we were headed. We would have a super building with the Sunday school looking like Disneyland, with all the parents that are happy because we take care of their kids for 2 hours. We would have a place to lock up mother-in-laws. Look, if there's resources, why not? But God shook up our nest, and He said, I need someone to stand on the front lines. I need for someone to think about my little ones, those in need. That's why we have missionaries in Africa right now beginning a new project, and there's thousands of projects to begin. I'm part of the people that believe that the thorn is what puts us on our knees, and a good thorn therapy brings us down a peg. It lines our ducks in a row. And when the thorn hurts a whole lot, I've learned that the best thing is to stop battling, to surrender. Let's say to the Lord, Lord, I've made it to the end of my resources, my ideas, my strength, my energy. I've made it this far. The only thing we can say is, your grace is sufficient. Your forgiveness is enough. And through time, we're going to embrace the reality that even when life gets difficult, God is still good. He doesn't change. And so we're not going to fear anything or anyone. Fear God, and you will not fear anyone. Fear man. Don't have fear of God, and you'll fear everything else. The most subversive act that we can realize as a church today, the most political movement that we can support now, is not organizing a protest, nor announcing ourselves on social media because it seems like the brave speak on social media, say something online, as if that were going to change something, as if government worries about social media. No, the most subversive act that we can do now is obey the phrase, in this they will know that you are my disciples, that you love one another. If the government doesn't help the poor, then the church will continue offering food and help. And this goes for all the countries. If the government oppresses, the church should sustain the oppressed. If the government seeks vengeance, then the church should give off grace and not guilt. If the government divides, then the church should manifest unity. If the government destroys its enemies, then the church should love its enemies. We have to be a colony of heaven here in a hostile empire. We're at a point of no return. We've crossed the Rubicon, people. But that's not the worst. The worst is repeating the story of the pandemic. That our faith or fear be manipulated by Fox, by CNN, or Telemundo, whatever it is. In these moments, people are going to see what we're made of and what we're founded upon. And this goes for my Argentina, and this goes for Mexico, this goes for Colombia, this goes for El Salvador, this goes for any country, even Venezuela, our beloved Venezuelans that resist. This goes for our Cubans. I would love for all of us to go to Cuba for a moment and see how they live off rice and beans. But they say, God's with us. God has helped us this far. He's blessed us. They're happy. Thank God for that thorn therapy, for removing our nest, because it gives us the unique opportunity of being able to fly high. And when you see that the lines, I'm talking about here in the United States, the Hispanic lines weaken. People stop coming due to a Super Bowl, or because today is Mother's Day and they're going to go to lunch, because today it's my birthday, or because today it's my wedding anniversary. And the thinnest thread is always the church. You begin to smell, there's a shake-up in the nest coming. Because the pandemic brought us all despair to congregate, to see each other again. And then God has to shake the nest up again, because we're addicts to comfort. We're addicted of, I have God as the genie in the lamp, and if I need him, he's there. I have 911, and I have God on the agenda. If I need him, I'll call him. That's why it's time to give thanks for the thorns, to give thanks because we're belonging to this world of chaos, which doesn't leave us exempt, and this will help us reach our wings of faith. Squadron, it's time for us to fly, or to fly. An applause to the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. A grand applause to the King. The King is in the house today. Blessed are you. Someone has to celebrate more than that. Blessed are you. Give a grand applause and say, Lord, you've spoken with your people today, with your church, with your children. Blessed are you. Whoa, impressive. More, 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 more. More, more, more. We exalt you, God. Can you feel it? The King is in the house. If you can lift your hands to heaven with me, those that are here for the first time or at home, those that are receiving Christ in their hearts, just say, Lord, forgive me. I accept you in my heart. Your grace is sufficient. And I want to pray. I want us all to pray together now. I don't know what the thorn in your flesh is. Maybe it's a situation, an illness, maybe a person, maybe a group of people, an environment. I don't know. But what if we stop crying out for God to remove the thorn? And what if we give thanks? Because maybe that's what's guiding us to Him. Lift up your hands and say, Lord, thank you. Because this season, which is the most difficult, or has been the most difficult, has brought me closer to you. Thank you, Lord, because I can understand that your power is perfected in my weakness. And now, until God gives you your own prophetic word, I'm going to lend you mine. Pretend that I'm giving you the little piece of paper that I was given in Uruguay, which says, put your name on it and say, let my grace be sufficient. That's all I'm going to give to you day after day. And when you can't go on, you're going to receive strength for that day. And you're going to go to bed to rest, and like a cell phone, plug yourself into the wall to recover your strength. And the next day, you'll come back for fresh manna. And again, strength for a new day, one day at a time, we just sang here. That's what I need from you. Give me the strength to live one day at a time. We exalt you, Lord. We glorify you. We cry out. Everyone. Everyone. We exalt you, King. Everyone, lift up your hands. Everyone, cry out. Those that can pray, those that can say, Lord, I believe that something new begins in me from here on out. Sweet Spirit. Everyone praying, everyone. Beloved church, I have spoken, as I say every week, and I've foolishly spoken to your mind, which is as far as I can reach, but I know that the Spirit has spoken to your heart. There are no words to bring you comfort. These are difficult moments, yes. But man, we're the generation that resisted a bacteriological war. I always say, and I'll say it over and over, we have survived a war superior to the Second and First World War, because in both wars, only a part of the world was included. A war has never involved the entire globe the way it did with the last pandemic. A war that went after our children, our grandchildren, our parents. It left our loved ones in tubes. We had to see them pass away at a young age, but we survived. Are we really going to be afraid? Are they going to frighten us? Are they really going to make us buckle with laws, with politics? Being here in the U.S. is not because of Trump or Newsom, not up to the Democrats or the Republicans. Like in Argentina, it's not up to the Kirchnerists or the libertarians or the Peronists or the radicals that resist. No, the solution has always been in the hands of the one who hasn't moved from his throne. And he reminds us, when these things happen, lift your eyes to heaven and trust, because the gospel will be preached around the world. There will be a need, a hunger. They will run to listen to the word. There will be hunger for bread in the houses of bread. They will stop following magicians, scammers of the faith, and they will begin to seek out the word of God. They will go to the corners of the world looking for a word, looking for food. Blessed are those that provide food, not just for the body, but also for the spirit. Let us be the silos to the world this time, but spiritually. Let's sustain and let's be the resistance, founded upon the rock. And let's live, because the wind is the same for all. But we'll see who's founded upon sound and built upon the rock. And those that have built their lives on sand during times of peace, it's not too late. If not, God wouldn't take time to speak to us on this. It's time to say, Lord, change out my foundations now. Now. I want to be built upon the solid rock, firm, placed on God, believing in you. Thank you, God, for this time. Thank you for your presence. To those that are watching from home, those that are from any other nation, to those that are watching from the United States of America, from any of the states, I bless your entry and your exit when you go to bed and when you wake up. I bless pastors, leaders, those that have had complications, those that have let their arms down. Thank you for the thorns, Lord. Thank you for these marvelous thorns. Thank you, Lord, for your blessing. We give you thanks. We bless you. I'd like to say goodbye to the people on the other side. May God bless you. All those that are at home, here we'll stay with one little prophetic thing that we'll do here locally. But they're at home. May God bless you. May He keep you. Everything's okay. The king is still on his throne. That's good news.